When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ hath regarded my helpless estate, and hath shed his own blood for my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when the faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll, the trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul.
Very serious now. I'm going to give you a message that has been a great source of comfort to me personally in the last few months. Well, I think most of you know that my wife went to be with her Lord early this year, and this has really helped me. I'm going back to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 4. It's a very brief verse. It's, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." Now, if you don't know what that is, it's called the Shema. It's called the Shema because in Hebrew it begins Shema Israel, hear Israel. And it was given to the Israelites before they entered the promised land, and for a very good reason. You know, you need to remember that the Hebrews were not always worshippers of God. Abraham was an exception. If you go to Joshua 24, you'll find that Joshua says to the people, "You know that your fathers lived on the other side of the river, and they served many gods." So you must understand that Israel had a background in paganism. Only Abraham was chosen by God to be the man to create a nation for God. In fact, there's another little story told concerning Abraham as a boy, Abram. They said that Abram's boy, Terah, had an idol shop in Ur of the Chaldees. And when his father went away on business, he left the boy in charge of the shop. So Abram took a club and he smashed every idol in the shop, with the exception of the largest one, into whose hands he put the club. When his father Terah came back home and he saw the devastation, he said, "Who hath done this?" And Abram said, "The idol hath done it." And his father said, "How can that be? The idol cannot see or do anything." Abram said, "Let your ears hear the words your mouth is speaking." And in that way, he turned his father against idolatry. And that is why when Abram was called to leave Ur of the Chaldees in Mesopotamia to go to the promised land, his father went with him as far as Haran, where he died. Now this business of idolatry was always a problem with Israel of old. It was the oldest and the biggest problem. It was a problem that the prophets were constantly having to deal with, time and time again. They had to call the people back to the worship of the one true God. People today speak about Jehovah. I don't like the name Jehovah because it's not a Bible name. I'm sorry, it might seem a little bit pedantic, but I speak of Yahweh. Yeah, why? It's the sacred tetragrammaton, the four-letter name, YHVH in English. That's how it's spelled in Hebrew. But in the 1300s, and this is just a little bit of information, free, gratis, and for nothing, I'm just throwing this in as I go along. In the 1300s, a theologian named Galatinus took the four consonants, the tetragrammaton, YHVH, and he took the vowels out of the Hebrew word Adonai. I'm thinking of the vowels. And he put the vowels in between the consonants. And he consequently created Yahovah, which we have anglicized to Jehovah. So we've got really a mongrel word when we say Jehovah. And I don't like to use it. I prefer to think of Yahweh. We don't really know how that name should be spoken, for the simple reason that it fell out of use after the captivity. Before the captivity, it was in use. But ultimately, the Israelites or the Jews or the Hebrews, all three names apply, decided that they shouldn't use that name. They misunderstood a passage that says, everyone that speaketh the name shall surely be put to death. Everyone that pronounceth the name. And it was a mistranslation. It really meant everyone that blasphemes the name shall be put to death. But one ancient translation said, everyone that pronounces the name shall be put to death. So they stopped using it. And consequently, since there are no vowels in that name, people forgot how it should be pronounced. But I'm calling it Yahweh. That he's one God. Now, this was the God who called Abraham to leave Ur of the Chaldees to go to the promised land. For the simple reason it became a problem was that not only was there background in idolatry, as Joshua says, but you must remember, in chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, you get God calling Abraham to go to the promised land, which turned out to be the land of Canaan. When, in the time of Jacob, and that will be probably a reading next week or the week after, when in the time of Jacob, the Israelites went into the land of Egypt, 76 of them all together, they were leaving Egypt when they'd been for 200 years. And Egypt was a polygamous land. Remember that not one of the people that came out of Egypt under the leadership of Moses had been outside of Egypt. They were brought up, born in Egypt, bred in Egypt, and they'd seen Egypt worship, where they had individual gods and town gods and city gods and national gods. There were so many gods in Egypt. They'd been brought up for 200 years. in a land of the worship of many gods. And consequently, they have to be warned. Now, when you get to the land of Canaan, it's going to be different. Remember that for most of their time, the Israelites were shepherds, were herders. They followed their flocks from country to country, from one piece of land to another. They lived in tents. They didn't build houses or anything like that. They were not builders. Consequently, when they got to the land of Canaan and were settled in the land and had been allocated a piece of land, they had become farmers. And the people of Canaan were polygamists. And they worshipped many gods. The Baalim owned the land. Now the word Baal means the master, the owner, the husband. And there were different gods in different parts of the land. And these gods were worshipped under different names. But they were the owners of the land. So you can imagine the Israelites turning to the occupants of the land of Canaan, whom God had allowed to remain as thorns in the flesh, to trouble them. How do we get on this business of farming? We're not farmers. Oh, you have to worship Baal. You have to worship the owner. You have to worship the master, the husband. And the land gets its fertility through the act of worship and through the sexual action that takes place after worship. So all idolatry had a sexual connotation. That's why you read later that they worshipped idols and the people rose up to play. When you read that, rose up to play, they're not playing football. That's what it means, honestly. That's what it means. And it was a problem. Absolutely, time and time again. That's why the prophet was sent to call them back from the worship of idols. And it was emphasized, your God is one Lord. One Lord. And one of the most dramatic scenes in the whole of the Old Testament, I think, is in 1 Kings chapter 18. We have the prophet Elijah confronting the 450 false prophets of Baal. And they come into the land brought in by Jezebel, the daughter of the king of Tyre, whom Ahab had married. And she was wanting to introduce the worship of Baal alongside the worship of Jehovah. You don't have to abandon the worship of your God. You can worship them two together. And so there's this tremendous challenge issued by the prophet Elijah on Mount Carmel. He said, right, you get your prophets here. Let them build an altar. Let them offer a sacrifice. But don't put any fire there. And call upon your God to answer by fire. And the God who answers by fire, let him be God. And he told the prophets of Baal, built the altar, put the sacrifice on, and they called to their God to answer by fire. From morning till night they cried, but no voice answered. And there you got the rugged man Elijah standing on the sidelines. Go on, shout louder. Perhaps your God's gone on a journey. Then you have to wait for going home. Or perhaps he's asleep. And dare I say this in the Hebrew, perhaps he's gone to the bathroom. That's what the Hebrew says. Perhaps he's gone, and you have to wait till he comes out. Just absolute sarcasm and criticism. And then, you know what happened? Elijah built the altar, poured water on the sacrifice. Do it again, do it again. Had the altar of the sacrifice swimming with water. Then he called upon God to answer by fire, and God answered. And the people said, the Lord, Yahweh, He is God. Yahweh, He is God. Lovely scene. And then, of course, later on the prophets and the Psalms also criticized the idolatry into which the people had sung. For example, Psalm 115. Their idols are silver and gold. They have eyes, but they don't see. They have noses, but they don't smell. They have ears, but they don't hear. They have mouths, but they don't speak. They have feet, but they don't walk. And then there's a devastating comment. They that worship them shall become like to them. A little later on, you come Isaiah coming along in that marvelous chapter in Isaiah 40. Comfort ye, my people, said your God. And the prophet goes on to say, to whom then will ye liken me? He says, the workman makes a graven image and covers it with gold. He that is too poor for such an oblation chooses a tree that will not rot and seeks them a cunning workman. And he goes on, he says, to make a God that cannot be moved. He says, have you not known? Have you not heard? Hath it not been told you from the beginning? It is He who sits on the circle of the earth. And the inhabitants thereof as grasshoppers. He taketh of the isles as a very little thing, and Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor the beasts thereof for a burnt offering. To whom then will you liken me, saith God. And that's interesting. He sits on the circle of the earth. In Hebrew, that's Khug, Khug, and it doesn't mean a circle drawn on a plane. It means a sphere, a ball. That's the rotundity of the earth taught in Isaiah chapter 40, long before our astronomers ever thought of it, long before they ever knew it. It's there in the Bible. And again, a little bit later on, in Isaiah chapter 45, Isaiah pours scorn on these worshippers of idols. He talks about a man. He says he goes to the forest, and he chooses a tree, and he cuts it down, and with half of it he cooks his dinner, cooks a meal, and then he makes a god out of the other half, and then he falls down and worships the thing he's just made. And you tell him how ridiculous it is, absolutely absurd is it? And by the way, Jeremiah uses the same illustration. And then in Isaiah 46, first few verses, the first verse says, Bel bowed down, full, these are two Assyrian gods he's talking about this time. Remember, we're talking about almost the Babylonian captivity now. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops. And he says, the Lord, the amount of beasts of burden, and the animals have to carry them. And God says, you don't have to carry me. From birth to hoar hair, when your hair is turning white, I have made and I will carry. Now there's the truth there. Any god that you make, you're going to have to carry. It'll never move itself. Can't help you. And yet we have people today worshipping gods that human hands have made. That cannot do anything for them. Can't help them. Can't respond to their needs. How is we're going to get that across to intelligent people today? There are a lot of intelligent people in the world who actually do, for whatever reason, respect and regard images that humankind have made. That is not God. They're not the creators of the earth. They didn't make anything. They're made. They can't help you. They have to be carried because they have been made and they can't help themselves. I don't want to worship a God like that. But God says it's different with me. He said, I made you and I will carry you. You know, well, we say we don't worship that kind of God in this country. We don't worship idols. We don't have idols that we have to carry. No, maybe not. But I just wonder sometimes if our religion's not a burden to us. Sometimes, you know. Mind you can have a God, and it doesn't have to be the figure of a man or the figure of an animal or anything. You can make a God out of somebody that you love. You can make a God out of your car. I remember living once in Corby, and I saw one of my neighbours at his religious service every Sunday morning. He was washing his car, washing his God on 4 wheels. And he talked about doing something religiously. Well, he was washing his car religiously every Sunday morning. Because it was the pride of his life. Some people worship money. Some people have a God of position, authority, of power. Well, we're not like that. Let's suppose we're not like that. But nevertheless, is it possible that even as Christians, sometimes our religion becomes a burden to us? You know, I think somebody once said that Sunday morning is the worst morning in the week for Christians. And I'll tell you why. Because during the week, the breadwinner goes off to work, the house is empty. The children go off to school, and the wife or whoever it is can get on with it, getting the house tidied up and everything like that, and everything's peaceful and quiet. And Sunday morning, everybody's at home. And that's when the fireworks start. Where's my shirt? Have you not washed yet? Go and get and brush your hair. And your mother's running around like a chicken with a head chopped off, trying to get everybody ready to go to church. And you arrive at church, and they sit down there. Give her remember to lock the door. And what do I do? Did you turn on the oven? Is that right? Am I right? Right, that's right. Yeah. And then he comes out to work. Yeah, do you realize that worship requires concentration? Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy mind, with all thy soul, with all thy strength. You have to concentrate. You have to make the effort to shut other things out of your mind in order that you might worship acceptably. It's sometimes difficult because you're not really in a worshiping mode, should I say. I remember one man in Corby, his name was Roger. It's not the Roger that we have now. He was an American serviceman who was based at Falconbury. He always came in with his family at the last minute. They were all the first one to leave. And he once said to me, Frank, I don't get anything out of the services. And I said, I was very naughty. I said, Roger, I'll tell you why you don't get anything out of the services. Because you don't put anything into the services. That's right. Some people have the idea to come on Sunday morning for a kind of spiritual massage to set them up for the week. Well, it's not like that. You don't actually come to receive. You will receive. You can't come into the presence of God without receiving. But the main purpose of your coming today is to offer worship, to offer thanks, gratitude for the blessings of the past, because His mercies are new every morning, because His faithfulness is great, as Jeremiah says. It's true, isn't it? Every morning, the mercies of them, we take them for granted. But we can get to the point where even our religion becomes a burden because we haven't really understood the nature of worship. Now let me ask you a question. What would transform God from being a burden to being a blessing? I can tell you that very easily, very simply. When do you know that God's your Father? When you really understand that you're a child of God. That God is your Father. Now, I've heard preachers in the past, not recently, but in the past, say that when Jesus taught His disciples the so-called Lord's Prayer, which is the disciples' prayer, the Lord's Prayer is John 17, when He taught them the Lord's Prayer, that was the first time that anybody had ever called God Father. That's not true. God is called Father in the Old Testament. If I had the time, and I really mean this, I can give you 16 passages in 8 different books of the Old Testament in which God is spoken of as Father. In Exodus 4 is sufficient. Israel is my firstborn, God says. And then again, you get Solomon saying, Lord, thou art our God, Lord, thou art our Father forever. But the point is, I'll make this point very quickly. Every time you read of God as Father in the Old Testament, it is God as Father of the nation, of the people. Just in the sense that a king is supposed to be the father of his people, to look after his people. You never find in the Old Testament God being termed in a personal relationship with an individual. And that is the difference. When you come to the New Testament and you talk about the fatherhood of God, you're talking about having been born of God, born as a child of God, born into God's family. You have a relationship, an intimacy with God, each one of you as a Christian, that no Jew ever had this personal relationship. And Jew knows what I'm talking about, because this Shema is very important to them. The Shema was put into little tubes called the mezuzah and fastened to the right-hand doorposts of every door in the house of a devout Jewish family, where they could either touch it or kiss it, to show that they believed that God was in charge there. But that's as far as it got. They never had an intimate personal relationship such as you have with God. They could never approach God as Father in the way you can in your prayer. And that makes a difference. When we lived in Argyle Street in England, moved there first of all, my parents sent me to a junior school. They didn't realize it at the time. It's a Church of England school. And that's where I learned the Catechism of the Apostles' Creed. And I remember even now, one of the questions of the Catechism, what is the chief end of man? And the Catechism answer is, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. I thought, enjoy God? I could enjoy McDonald's. I love trifles. But enjoy God. Well, the N as a prefix means end. Joy as a verb means to rejoice. So to enjoy God means to rejoice in God. Rejoice in God. Are you rejoicing in God? Your reason to. Rejoice in your relationship. That's the whole Bible's full of rejoicing for believers. And forever. Now what's forever? Is it in the sweet by and by? Not a bit of it. It's right now. Forever's already started. This is part of forever. So your chief end, according to the Catechism, is to glorify God in your life and to enjoy always your relationship with Him. We're not always like that, are we? Not a bit of it. Let me tell you something else too. When I was a boy then, my father and I used to take me to Borsdale Wood. I don't know, some of you won't know where Borsdale Wood is, but it's a lovely spot in England. It is a historic place. The Boers were there, the Danes were there. And we used to walk. We used to take me for walking. But my legs got tired. So what do you think I said? You know what I said? I said, Dad, carry me. And he swung me off my feet and he put me on his shoulders, and that's how I came triumphantly home, on the shoulders of my father, thinking how strong my father was and what a grand view I had of everything around me. But God will do that with you. Moses mentions this in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 31. He says that God carried you all the way, as a father bears his own son, until you came to this place. He's talking about God carrying Israel all the way from Egypt. In fact, in Leviticus 32, you have another illustration concerning this. As an eagle flutters over her nest and stirs up her young. That's what God did with it. Think about it. Moses never saw this in Egypt. If you've ever been to Egypt, and some of you, anybody been to Egypt? Have you been? But it's just a narrow strip of land about a mile wide on either side of the River Nile. That's all Egypt is. Not a massive nation. The fertility area of Egypt is very limited on either side of the Nile. So Moses never saw eagles in Egypt. But he saw them in the Sinai Peninsula. When through the mountainous regions he was bringing his people to the land of Canaan. And there the eagle was an eyrie right up on the rocks there. Massive nest. And the young eagles would be in that nest. But they didn't want to fly. So what do you suppose the mother did? They have wingspan of sometimes 7 feet. She hovered over the nest and created a turbulence, beat her wings, so that the little eaglets were toppled out of the nest, fell down the side of the cliff, and did instinctively what God meant them to do. Stretch their tiny wings and fly. But they got tired. So the mother eagle would swoop underneath them, catch them on her wings, soar up to higher currents of air, perform her somersaults in the air again, and the little birds fell off her wings and began to fly again. And time again they got confident until they flew. And God says, you didn't want to leave Egypt, but I stirred you up. That's why you were persecuted. I stirred you up like the mother eagle disturbs the nest, and I've carried you all the way to this place. It's a wonderful thought, isn't it? In fact, in the next chapter, you have that wonderful passage that we sometimes see on wall plaques. The eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath of the everlasting arms. Isn't that wonderful? Well, what is it? Is it a text simply to use as an ornament in your house? Or is it a truth to live by? The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath is the everlasting arms. If only we could understand that our God is a God who is willing to carry us, wanting to carry us. There's a passage in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. Peter says, casting all your cares upon him, for he cares for you. Now there's more to that verse than you realize. The word casting means unloading. Unloading all your cares. The word care there in Greek means your distractions. It doesn't mean your troubles. It doesn't mean your anxieties. It doesn't mean your worries. It means the things that drive you almost demented, distract you, so you don't know what to... How can I illustrate this? Tomorrow's Monday. Wash. It's a wash day Monday. Wash day Monday for many people. Right, okay, wash day Monday. I don't know what the weather's going to be like, but you've got your washing out on the line, and the rain comes. And you're rushing out and you're taking in the washing in the rain. And while you're doing that, something else starts burning, and the smoke filling the kitchen. And it's getting 12 o'clock, and children coming over to you, one's fallen in the mud and he's soaking, he's wet through. Where do I turn? When you get to the point where you don't know which way to turn, what to do, when you're distracted, unload all your distractions on Him. Everything that drives you to despair, beyond worry, beyond anxiety, everything that drives you to despair, unload on Him. For, Peter says, He cares. And do you know that's a different word entirely? The word care there, He cares for you. It means He cares without being distracted for you. Do you know, I've been preaching now for over 70 years. And I still can barely get my mind around that verse. And I'm being absolutely honest here. I can hardly imagine what it means. It means that in the midst of the responsibility of running the universe, my God, my Father, is able to think about me as if I was the only one in the universe to think about. I know it's beyond comprehension, isn't it? But it's true. God, if you're a child of His, the Almighty, the Omniscient, the Omnipotent, the Eternal, is able to think about you with your problems and isolate you as if nobody else existed but you. That's what it means. If only we trusted it. If only we believed it. You know, I like the story of the chap walking in Ireland. Have you ever seen these walkers? They've got boots that look like deep-sea divers' boots on to start with. I don't know if they can lift up the feet. And this chap had what seemed to be everything but, including the kitchen sink on his back. You've sometimes seen the packs they have, and they're walking along like this. And this fellow got very tired. And just then an Irish farmer came along with a little pony and trap. So he said, excuse me, I said, would you mind giving me a lift into the village? And with that innate kindness that these people have. He said, certainly, come on, get up into the trap. So the walker gets up and he sits next to the farmer, and they're talking. And the farmer realizes the fellow's got his pack on his back. He said, why don't you take the pack off and put it in the bottom of the and the walker said, well, he said, I thank you for carrying me. I didn't think you'd carry me burden as well. Now, you believe that God can carry you, don't you? Don't you? You really believe that? Do you believe it or not? You believe it? You think you can carry your burden too? So why don't you trust Him with it? And you know, I could go on one time, but I'm going to close. There's a blessing here for the aged. You know, when people get old, and you know this too, Peggy, when people begin to get old, sometimes you begin to wonder if people think about you. You know, and even with the best one in the world, well, you know, my son, he doesn't come to see me very often, but you know, he's busy. He's got a family to look after now, and he's got a job, and he's working very hard. He really doesn't have the time. But you get others who don't feel like that. They feel a little bit annoyed. Well, you might as well be dead when you get to my age. You stick in a backwater, they don't bother about you. And that's true as well in some instances. But God doesn't do that. God says, look, I made you from the womb to the time when your hair is turning white. I'll carry you. If only we have the faith to believe Him. Cast all your cares upon Him. But I tell you, this has been something, been a blessing to me. Believe me. After being married 66 years, it's been a big loss. I am sometimes lonely, but I'm never alone. And I've learned one thing too, and you learn it too as you go through life. I told somebody last night, You may learn that God answers prayer, but not all his answers are without pain. Nevertheless, it's true that all things do work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to his purpose.
Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, join with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Rock of ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. Let the water and the blood from thy riven side which flowed be of sin the double cure. Cleanse me from its guilt and power. Not the labor of my hands can fulfill the law's demands. Could my zeal no respite know? Could my tears forever flow? All for sin could not atone. Thou must save, and thou alone. Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. Naked come to thee for dress, helpless look to thee for grace. while I to the fountain fly. Wash me, Saviour, or I die.